basically a few years of my life, which was one of the biggest battles in my life.
We all know Meek Mill ain't quite where he used to be in his professional life. That's no shot at the guy, that's just what it is. From numbers to name recognition, there's no way he's keeping up with guys like Drake or J. Cole. But that begs the question, even when he was at his height in the early 2010s, was he ever on the same level? Either way, we gotta admit there are a few different issues that have led to Meek being where he's at now, and honestly, some of it's pretty upsetting. You'd be insane to argue that Meek isn't at the very least talented at what he does. I mean, if you're skeptical, check out some of his old freestyles. But what really happened to his career? First off, Meek's had it pretty hard since well before he even started rapping. He grew up in northern Pennsylvania, mostly raised by his mother. Meek lost his father when he was only 5 years old, and that made his childhood a lot rougher than it really needed to be. From there, Meek's mom did basically whatever she could to make ends meet, whether that be cutting the hair of her friends or shoplifting. Meek was quiet and didn't really talk much when he was a kid, according to all accounts. But eventually he got to know one of his uncles, who was a big DJ. And when we say big, we mean like went on to influence DJ Jazzy Jeff and Will Smith while they were coming up as musicians. And he started getting into hip-hop, looking for any cassettes he could get his hands on. That's when Meek finally started doing his best to make a name for himself as a battle rapper, at school and wherever else he could find someone else who was willing to take him on toe-to-toe. He started up a rap group, which admittedly didn't last very long, called the Bloodhounds, with 3 of his friends. While they didn't blow up, they did start burning their music onto blanks to pass out to anyone and everyone. Things were going pretty well for the young Meek, and even if he didn't find success early, he was still out there doing his best to make a name for himself. Unfortunately, Meek ran into a little bit of trouble that would end up haunting him for the rest of his adult life. Meek was walking to a corner store when he was about 18, and he was armed. He was arrested for possessing his weapon illegally and also beaten up by the cops who came across him. After tangling with the police, Meek had bruises all over his face, a braid pulled out. The cops claimed that actually Meek had been chasing them around with a weapon, threatening to shoot. That doesn't really make any sense, as we'll see later, but there's a reason why those cops were being dishonest. Meek dealt with the consequences of all that and ended up putting out 4 different mixtapes with the Bloodhounds. After that, he finally put out his solo project called Flamers 2, Hottest in the City, which got pretty big. Meek got a record deal extended by a local label, and things were going great. The release also caught the attention of T.I. Meek jumped on the chance with an offer from T.I., despite the fact that he was being considered for another offer. Meek was finally getting the recognition he deserved. Or was he? In 2008, while negotiations for the deal with T.I. were in the works, Meek found himself once again at odds with law enforcement. He got caught on a few charges, once again for weapons, and this time also for possession. The judge, who was a real key player in this story, was named Janice Brinkley. She sentenced him to 11 to 23 months in prison, and in addition to that, sentenced him to a whopping 8 years of parole. That wasn't just ordinary parole either, especially not under this judge. In this situation, literally any small interaction of the law could result in serious jail time for Meek. I'm talking like J-level walking crimes could put the dude away for upwards of 5 years. Easy. Meek got out of jail in 2009. And talks about signing him were back on. For now, that whole parole thing was just a minor setback. Meek put out Flamers 3 with DJ Drama and even managed to get features from T.I. and Rick Ross. Unfortunately, between all the legal troubles, Meek never actually got to release a full-length studio album on the label. Meek and T.I. parted ways in 2011 when Meek finally joined the label most people know him from, Maybach Music Group. This is where he really blew up. Meek was featuring everyone from DJ Khaled to Nas at this point, and he seemed nearly unstoppable, despite the fact that he was never really rising up to the level of a lot of his contemporaries. People knew him and people liked him, but he never managed to reach the heights of rap royalty from that time. Unfortunately for Meek, maybe he just didn't have enough time to get there thanks to what happened back in 2013. That's when it became clear just how awful Judge Brinkley was going to be about this whole parole thing. In 2013, Judge Brinkley brought him in for violation of his parole. He had failed to report his travel plans, and apparently some of his social media posts had resulted in fans mobbing his PO on social media, culminating in some death threats. First of all, there are a couple of things wrong with this whole situation. An artist really isn't responsible for the things their fans decide to do unless they're literally out there telling their fans to do certain things. The other issue is that he's a touring artist. He's traveling all the time. When the judge asked him why he wasn't reporting his travel plans, he responded by telling her that every day he has to go see his parole officer is a day that he's losing money. On June 11th of 2014, the judge decided to revoke his parole, and he had to spend 3 to 6 months in jail. The judge told him that missing out on money was just a condition of his parole and ordered him to take etiquette classes, which meant that Meek was going to spend even more time outside of the studio and off a tour bus. Once again, in 2015, the judge told him that he had violated his parole, and she told him that he couldn't work or travel for 2 months until the trial took place. When the trial actually did happen, he got 90 days of house arrest during which he couldn't work, and he was sentenced to do community service. As if all this weren't bad enough, he was also sentenced to a whole 6 more years of probation, meaning that he had to continue to be on his toes because he'd already just seen how strict this judge was going to be about the whole thing. Something else pretty big happened in 2015, and for real, this is probably the one place where public opinion of Meek finally changed. Meek decided that he was going to fire some shots at Drake, pretty much unprompted. It was probably that he didn't like being compared, but either way, the results were disastrous. Meek accused Drake of using a ghostwriter, which included him posting his ghostwriter's raps for everyone to see. Those raps would go on to become Drake's songs. There's really not much someone could say about this one not being true at this point. Drake and Meek traded diss tracks back and forth for a long time, but by that time, the dust had all settled. It seemed like everyone thought that Drake was the winner, whether that's because Drake has more staying power and became the bigger rapper, or because his disses were actually better is anyone's guess. But after this, a lot of people turned their backs on Meek. Another issue with this beef is that there was a lot of crossover in the fan bases, so when people jumped the ship on Meek, they'd picked a side. Once again, in 2017, he was brought in for another probation violation, this time for getting into a fight with 2 people at an airport. His parole was lifted, and he was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in prison. At this point, people kind of thought that maybe something sus was going on with this judge. The FBI launched an investigation into her conduct and realized that she was doing some rather shady things. First of all, she tried to get Meek to record a cover of a Boyz II Men song and give her a shout out on it. She also showed up at his community service and tried to get him to sign with a friend of hers after leaving Roc Nation. The whole thing is just so sketchy. From there, they finally decided to look into Meek's original arrest, and he got to file an appeal. Apparently, a whistleblower had come forward to expose thousands of corrupt cops in the area, and some of the cops who arrested Meek were named. Also around this time, Meek and Drake stopped beefing. Finally, in 2019, that conviction got overturned, and Meek got to be seen by a judge rather than Brinkley, which honestly is one of the best things that ever happened to him. Now, if we jump forward to today, we might have thought that all of Meek's problems were solved. We'd be wrong. Just recently, he posted some tweets about his label, Atlantic Records. He claims that they haven't been doing any promo for his bigger releases, effectively burying his career. On top of that, he's also saying that they won't let him release his next album yet, really for no good reason. That's another thing that killed him back in the day. He was dropping albums, but not when he needed to. He had nothing to go toe-to-toe with Drake's views. If he can't even drop a comeback when he needs it most, what's he supposed to do? He's also claiming that he introduced the label to Roddy Ricch, who we all know is blowing up right now. He was, at least according to himself, supposed to be the manager for Roddy, just like Rick Ross was supposed to do for him. Instead, while he was in jail, they decided they weren't going to go through with that and handled everything themselves. His tweet read, "So look, I made Atlantic Records hundreds of millions and let them me out Roddy, an artist they came to me about in jail. They're still saying I can't drop music until 9 months after my last album got blackballed, just wrapped buildings and Nina art with talent." Fans definitely heard Meek, and honestly, they weren't at all happy. One fan said, "Leave them, bro. The 9 months will be like 9 days, God willing." Another fan chimed in to say, "How well connected you are, I didn't think this type of thing could happen." That's the thing though, labels are just gonna do stuff like this. It doesn't matter how big you are. At the end of the day, it's all about money. What do you think though? Are Meek's days in the spotlight over? Is his label gonna do him dirty, or are they just dropping off some dead weight? Let us know what you think down below in the comments. And if you like this story, be sure to go ahead and check out this next one.